We are days away from the start of the first 12-team college football playoff. Georgia, of course, with a bye into the quarterfinals, but two SEC teams will begin play in the first round, with Texas hosting Clemson, Tennessee going on the road to Ohio State. We'll take a look at those matchups today in this edition of SEC Football Unfiltered, our podcast from the USA Today Network. I'm Blake Toppmeyer, back alongside John Adams. We'll also take a look at some developments in the transfer portal. Oklahoma losing quarterback Jackson Arnold to an in-conference school, with Arnold going from the Sooners to Auburn. Hugh Freeze has found his next quarterback. We will touch on that as well. But let's start with the college football playoff. John, as I mentioned, three SEC teams in it. We know who they are. We set the matchups. As you look at the bracket, Georgia has the best seed among SEC teams, has the bye at the 2 seed, could face Notre Dame in the quarterfinals, or if there's an upset, would face Indiana in the quarterfinals. But Georgia dealing with an injury to Carson Beck. We'll pivot to backup quarterback Gunnar Stockton. And pretty favorable draw for Texas, whereas Tennessee gets a difficult draw playing Ohio State in round 1 and then would have to meet Oregon if they win. So as you look at these three paths, who's got it easiest? Who's got it toughest in terms of making a sustained run in the playoff?
Well, I think Tennessee has it toughest, and I guess it should have, since it's a lower seed. But the idea of having to beat Ohio State in Columbus, which is not out of the question, but it's a tough challenge, and then go win that game, and you're playing Oregon, the number 1 team, the only unbeaten team. So that's a really challenging path. Texas and Georgia, I guess I would say, as far as the easiest paths go, I don't know if any of these paths are easy. I like the way it's set up for Georgia, though. I know it has a Carson Beck. I don't know when he'll be able to play, if he will be able to play. I really liked what I saw of Gunnar Stockton in Georgia's last game against Texas in the SEC championship game. He can't throw the ball as well as Carson Beck can. However, the way the team responded to him, I thought was very significant in that second half. And I thought offensive coordinator Mike Bobo did a really nice job of game planning on the fly with Gunnar Stockton. So I guess I would go with Georgia, because I think Georgia, that staff, Kirby Smart, those guys are tough to beat in big games, and I think they've got a pretty decent path. I really wonder about Texas because of the quarterback situation. Not knocking Quinn Ewers, he had a great first half in that SEC championship game, but Texas might need something extra, and Arch Manning's running ability gives them that. Steve Sarkisian, to me, needs to pull the trigger on that. If it's a tight game and the offense isn't capitalizing, maybe put in Arch inside in the red zone, because that's where it faltered against Georgia. The thing of what's interesting to me when we talk about who has the best path, who has the toughest path, to me, there's no super team out there. Mm-hmm. So there's no opponent say, oh my God, we got to play them. Oh, you can't beat them. Nobody can. I don't see any of that. So I don't know. It might come down more, instead of how formidable the opponent is to how individual teams match up in games. I think that could be a bigger factor.
We agree, John, on Tennessee. I'm with you. I think they, of the three SEC teams, have undeniably the hardest path. I mean, to start on the road at Ohio State, we know Tennessee plays much better at home than they do on the road. Their 2 losses this season were on the road to Arkansas and to Georgia. And you really go back throughout the Heupel era, now the 4th season under Josh Heupel, Tennessee has consistently played incredibly well at home. They've beat Alabama at home twice now under Josh Heupel, but they've struggled on the road, not just against the elite competition, but they've also had stub your toe games against average opponents. This year against Arkansas, you go back a couple seasons ago, the loss to South Carolina that kept Tennessee out of the playoff. Last year, they got trounced by Missouri. And so, pretty consistently, we've seen Tennessee have they're just a different team at home versus on the road. And so, I think Ohio State's one of the most talented teams in college football anyway. Yeah, there's questions about, can Ryan Day win the big one? He stinks against Michigan. We know all of that. But in terms of pure roster talent, Ohio State's got as good a roster as anybody. And then you add in the fact that Tennessee has to go on the road. And, oh, by the way, your reward for winning that game would be facing the only undefeated team in college football, and Oregon. So I think just a brutal draw for Tennessee. And it kind of shows the difference, I think, between drawing like the 5 or 6 or 7 seed in this bracket format as compared to drawing the 9 seed. I mean, just a couple spots away, but it creates a much, much more difficult path to say go from the 7 to the 9 seed. For starters, you're on the road in round 1 versus hosting, and then it means you have to play the 1 seed in the quarterfinals should you have a round 1 upset. Where we differ just slightly, and I think it's kind of splitting hairs, I guess I give Texas a slightly more favorable path to going on a deeper run just because I like Texas's draw. They start off at home against Clemson, the 12 seed in this bracket. I think one of the 2 weakest teams in this bracket. I think it's either Clemson or SMU. They played that close ACC championship game. I would want to start with one of those teams in round 1. So a favorable draw for Texas in round 1. If they win, then they get a quarterfinal against Arizona State, a hot team, but still of the 4 teams in the quarterfinals that have byes, Arizona State would be the one that I would want to play. And then you're setting up for maybe a semifinal against Oregon, which doesn't look real desirable. But I think your hope would be that perhaps Oregon gets upset in that quarterfinal game against Ohio State or Tennessee, and you could avoid facing them. So I do like Texas's draw. I think it's sort of proof to something we talked about throughout the season, that being the 5 or 6 seed could be a really, really nice spot in this bracket. For Georgia, I don't hate the draw, but Notre Dame has been playing incredibly well ever since that stunning week 2 loss to Northern Illinois. And so depending on how Georgia adjusts to the quarterback change, that could be a potential upset in the quarterfinals if it is indeed Georgia Notre Dame. However, you brought up a good point with Gunnar Stockton, John, how the teams seem to respond to him and the different wrinkle he provides to that offense with his running ability. And as I wrote in a column last week, it would not be surprising in the slightest if Georgia had its better quarterback sitting on the bench throughout the season, because for all the things that Kirby Smart does well, he has misjudged quarterback situations in the past. And he insisted this season that he was playing the right quarterback when Carson Beck was going through a slump. And there were questions from the media about, would you make a quarterback change, Kirby? He said, no, I'm playing the right guy. I'm playing the guy that gives us the best chance to win. Well, Gunnar Stockton now has a chance to prove that idea wrong. And I mean, it was just a couple years ago where Kirby had his best quarterback on the bench in Stetson Bennett, and it took multiple injuries to JT Daniels before he handed the reins to Bennett. And of course, all Stetson Bennett did was lead Georgia to back-to-back national championships. So, looking at that a little bit further, I guess, how much are you in the camp that believes that Gunnar Stockton might not really hamper Georgia's ability to make a run at this thing? Because I guess I'm in the camp of, I don't think the quarterback change gives me that much pause with Georgia. It's more the draw in the bracket, I guess, than anything, and maybe some uncertainty with the quarterback change. But I don't kill off Georgia's chances just because of the quarterback change.
No, and the thing about Georgia, it's got a track record, a big game track record, regardless of quarterback. I think in a lot of these games, the coaching to me favors. I mean, I think Kirby Smart, even though he doesn't always play the best quarterback, it's worked out for him. It certainly did with Stetson Bennett. And I think Kirby Smart's a really good in-game manager. The irony there with the quarterback, I really think that what Kirby Smart down deep wants to do is run the football, because he's a defensive guy at heart, and he understands what's going on in college football and how successful teams have been throwing the ball and how that seems to kind of be the way to go now. But what we also see is if you have a dual threat quarterback, he gives you an extra advantage that you don't have with a drop back guy, and which is what Carson Beck is. I mean, he can run when need be. He's made significant runs for Georgia, but he's not he doesn't pose the running threat that a Gunnar Stockton does or that Stetson Bennett did. But if you want to run the ball, it really helps if you also have a quarterback who can run. When you do that zone read and he fakes a handoff to the running back, and you can't dismiss the possibility he might keep it, that's a huge factor in how you defend it. I thought it was also significant in that game that Trevor Etienne returned to the lineup. When he was healthy and when he was playing, he didn't really give Georgia the running threat I thought he would based on what I saw at Florida. I just thought he would have a bigger year for Georgia, but he has been hurt. And when he came back in that game, that's kind of the Trevor Etienne I expected to see when he transferred from Florida. So you combine that with him having seemingly fresh legs, with Gunnar Stockton running the ball too, and with the way Georgia plays defensively, it's going to be a tough out in this playoff. And I don't know how I don't know what they're going to say about Carson Beck, if they're going to say anything. They may not. They just say, hey, he's day-to-day, he's looking good, or whatever they want to say. It's to Georgia's advantage for the opponent to be uncertain about Carson Beck's status.
Yeah, I mean, it's not great news in the early going here. The phrase being used is out indefinitely. Indefinitely could be until 5 minutes from now, or it could be, until 6 months from now, right? But I think it is significant that they've gone with the out indefinitely versus day-to-day. Day-to-day makes it seem, I guess, a little more hopeful that he could come back in the shorter term. To me, out indefinitely, I generally interpret that as don't expect him back anytime soon. No guarantee of that, and perhaps the situation changes and new information comes to light. But I would be surprised at this point if it's not Gunnar Stockton running the offense in their quarterfinal game, again, whether it be against Notre Dame or Indiana. But to your point about the run game, John, we saw that after halftime against Texas in the SEC championship. I mean, it's been for years, Georgia fans have been saying, and I'm paraphrasing, run the dang ball, Bobo. And finally, after Carson Beck's injury, it forced offensive coordinator Mike Bobo to commit to the run after halftime, and Trevor Etienne delivered his best game of the season. And as you were hitting on, John, he missed 3 games in November with a rib injury. Well, now he's back, and he didn't show any ill effects of that in the SEC championship game. Interestingly enough, Etienne's 2 best performances this season came against Texas. So, Texas has one of the best defenses, one of the best run defenses, one of the best defensive fronts in the nation, and that's when Etienne has been at his best in the 2 games against Texas. And I thought that was a very encouraging sign for Georgia in this playoff. If it is going to roll with Gunnar Stockton, combining his running ability with a commitment to getting Etienne more involved, because he's the best athlete, I think, on this offense, and hasn't always maybe been used the way that we thought he would, or hasn't always performed the way that he thought he would after transferring from Florida. But I mean, he looked as good as he ever has in that game against Texas, and now it's going to force I think Georgia and Mike Bobo to rely on him. And that's the strength of Georgia is the interior of its offensive line, I think, and that showed up after halftime against Texas. And as you said, when the quarterback can run it, that opens up more options in the running game. But flipping gears to Texas a little bit, the situation with Quinn Ewers was playing not at 100%. The last couple weeks of the season, we've seen Arch Manning be used as a little bit of a wrinkle, but just in very short spurts when they maybe want to run a read option play in a short yardage situation or like that. He's a better runner, particularly at full speed, and Quinn Ewers is not. But even when both are full speed, Arch Manning's a more dangerous runner than Ewers. But you're kind of hitting on it there. I mean, do you think, with everything on the line here, national championship at stake, do you think it would behoove Sarkisian to go to maybe a little bit more of an Arch-friendly system and not put Ewers entirely on the bench, but to try to juggle the two throughout this postseason?
Well, yeah, I think that would definitely be to his advantage to do that. What he did against Georgia didn't work. For all the yardage Texas piled up, the game should have been in hand by halftime, but it couldn't close. And I think Arch Manning could close maybe because of that extra dimension he gives the offense. It's really interesting how coaches and connections with quarterbacks develop, and how once a quarterback has earned the confidence of his coach, how reluctant that coach is to make a change. It takes almost an act of Congress to do it. A coach just doesn't want to do it. He's almost too emotionally attached, as if he changes his quarterback, that changes the way the whole team thinks, or the foundation of your program just collapses if you make this quarterback change. Like everything is built around, he's our guy, we believe in him, we can't question him, this is an absolute. You don't need absolutes. I think in different matchups, in different situations, you might need a different quarterback. And Steve Sarkisian, what's funny about it, he's been willing to do that when he'll put Arch in and let him run the ball. Well, Arch isn't really a running quarterback. He can run, but that's not what he does best. So to me, if you're saying this guy is our best runner, well, he's no slouch as a passer either. So when you think, well, this will work, well, one of the reasons it'll work is because teams can't just say, stack the line and say, well, he won't throw it, he's just going to run it back in the Wildcat package. I just think right now with Quinn Ewers having a bum ankle, if the offense doesn't click right away in the playoff game, Sarkisian, it would really behoove him to make a switch. And you just can't. I mean, that's a flaw. If you can't make that change just because you're so intertwined with your quarterback and you're so emotionally attached to him, you got a problem. You got to do what's best for the program and what's best for the team in a given circumstance. And none of this is a knock on Quinn Ewers. But the guy doesn't, his ankle, he's not 100%. And I don't know if he will be in the next game either.
Big picture, John, we know this playoff format is under contract through next season. I think they could make some minor tweaks to the format next season, maybe with the seeding structure, but they're not going to blow up this format and come up with a 16 playoff for next year. It's going to be a 12-team playoff next year. Whether they adjust how the seeding is done or not, I don't know. But bigger changes, more significant changes could be coming in the 2026 season. I'm wondering, would you like to see any changes? Not asking you to predict what's going to happen. And I think we would both say whatever changes are going to happen are probably likely to favor the SEC and the Big Ten the most, since they hold the most power. But not predicting what's going to happen, but what would you like to see happen? Do you like this format? Do you think there needs to be any changes? I mean, there's been a lot of squabbling, particularly over the seeding. Should the top 4 seeds and the byes be reserved for the conference champions? Should it just go to who the committee deems as the 4 best teams? I don't personally have a problem with this format. I do think, for years that there was sort of a clamoring to provide some extra value for winning your conference championship and make sure these conference championship games still mean something in the expanded playoff era. And so, I don't have a huge issue with it. I mean, do I think Boise State and Arizona State are among the 4 best teams in college football? No. However, they won a conference championship. Penn State and Ohio State didn't. So I don't have a huge issue with Boise State getting a first round bye, and Ohio State, which lost at home to Michigan, that being the penalty for that. They're not kept out of the playoff. They're still hosting a first round playoff game, but hey, you blew it at home against Michigan. You don't get the bye. Boise State won its conference championship. It gets the bye. A lot of people don't like that. They wish they just seeded the top 4 seeds, and those are the teams that get the byes. What sort of changes, if any, would you like to see? Do you like automatic byes for conference champions? Do you think there should be adjustment to seeding? What's your perspective?
Well, I mean, are we talking about, okay, it's limited the changes it can make for next year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, overall, what I would like to do, I would just go to a 16 team format and do away with the byes and have, and also do away with the conference championship games. And I would want to see teams 1 through 16, regardless of whether they won a conference or not. But I really don't like the conference championship games now. I would just prefer to do away with that. But in terms of just looking ahead to next year, I would prefer that they seed teams, not according to whether they won their conference championship game or their conference. I would rather see the best teams have the highest seeds. So I would change that. I mean, it's not life or death. I mean, I'm looking forward to this playoff. I like the idea of having a playoff. I thought this season was so much more meaningful because of the playoffs. So many more games that mattered. I watch games and I watch a lot of college football, but I watched even more because of this the playoff possibilities and how this could impact teams down the road. You'll never get a system that's completely fair. So I don't, if you make the playoff and you've got a tougher road than another team and you question your seeding, you ought to look at what's gone on in the past and think, your team has lost 2 games and it's still running for the national championship. That just doesn't happen. That hasn't happened. So you've got, a lot of times teams thought if you lose one game, it might cost you a shot at the national title. You just can't lose. So now we have a team with 2 losses that could win a national championship. Be grateful for that. And don't blame the committee so much for how it plays out from this point. You've gotten another chance. You lost 2 games and you should be eliminated, and you should look forward to be playing in the Citrus Bowl or something of that ilk. But no, you're still in the running for the national titles. So you're going to have to face a great team or say maybe the best team probably anyway at some point. So you can complain. Of course you can complain. That's what sports is about. But, just be thankful you're in the playoff and you still have a shot at the championship.
Yeah, I think Ohio State is sort of the poster child for what you're just saying there. They assemble this elite roster in terms of talent. They blow it in the regular season by losing twice, particularly blowing it by losing to a very average Michigan team. In any previous iteration of the postseason, Ohio State's not in it. But now here they are as the 8th seed with 2 losses, and they're a team that, depending on what they're like mentally, I mean, I don't know how they're going to bounce back from that Michigan loss. What sort of the mental fortitude they're going to show, whether they use it as fuel or whether, Michigan just sucked the soul out of them in that final game of the regular season. We'll find out this weekend. But, the fact that they even still have a shot at this, that's sort of the face of what you're talking about, John. But, happening in the background of the college football playoff is college football free agency, which is the hot stove league is well underway. We're already seeing a lot of playoff movement within the SEC. Ole Miss and LSU have been among the most active in terms of making some impressive pickups. Surprise, surprise, when it comes to Ole Miss, right? I mean, this is the Lane Kiffin's playbook, and he's not going away from it. But from LSU, at least early on here, being more active in transfer acquisitions than we saw in the last cycle, I think a sign, if left unsaid, that Brian Kelly is maybe being a little more willing to embrace the transfer portal. We saw that in Kelly's first offseason when he really needed to add some talent in the roster after taking over, a depth chart in need of repair from Ed Ogeron. But then, Kelly had kind of turned away a little bit from the portal a little bit, but now he's ramping up those efforts, I think. But on the flip side of the coin, John, is Oklahoma. Oklahoma is one of the schools that's suffering from what you could call a mass exodus. Certainly not a great situation, I think, in Oklahoma on the heels of a 6-6 season. Several key players headed out the door, wide receiver Nick Anderson among them. Also, quarterback Jackson Arnold, the one-time ballyhooed recruit who was supposed to be the heir apparent of Oklahoma football after the transfer of Dylan Gabriel. Well, Jackson Arnold opened the season as starter, had some struggles, lost the job, got the job back later in the season, played behind a pretty poor offensive line, didn't always have a ton of weapons around him. He said, I'm out of here. I'm going to play for Hugh Freeze and Auburn. So I want to get to Oklahoma more in just a moment, John. But first, just your thoughts on Jackson Arnold to Auburn. Are you a believer that he could solve the years-long problem at quarterback at Auburn, or are you out on Jackson Arnold based on sort of the up and down season that he had at Oklahoma this year and that stretch where he surrendered the job as a starter even?
Well, let's go back to when Jackson Arnold arrived at Oklahoma. He was considered the future face of the program. This, as you mentioned, very much heralded quarterback. He, in that recruiting cycle, Jackson Arnold did not have a good year. He lost his starting job at one point, didn't regained it. He really never should have lost it, I didn't think, because the backup Michael Hawkins is to me limited. He's a better runner, but watching Jackson Arnold last year in a bowl game at the end of the season, he passed for 361 yards and he threw 4 interceptions. So that was kind of the knock on him, that he maybe forces things. But I see that with a lot of talented quarterbacks with really good arm talent, really good ability. They're very confident and they think they can make plays. And experience teaches them to distinguish when plays they think they can make and when the risk isn't worth the throw. And so I wouldn't give up on Jackson Arnold. I thought this was a very significant acquisition for Auburn. Auburn has a nice receiving core, as you know. And so Hugh Freeze has a record for being good at quarterbacks. The record has been diminished of late. But Auburn, to me, as much as it lost, was not as bad. It was not as bad as its record suggested. This is not a team bereft of talent. And I just thought, you get the right guy at quarterback, and he's the right kind of guy for Hugh Freeze's offense. He likes a mobile quarterback. Jackson Arnold rushed for over 100 yards on Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that told me something. They beat Alabama 24-3. The defense was great, but the defense was good all year. It was with Jackson Arnold. So to me, right now, when I look at that change by a quarterback moving within the conference, that drops Oklahoma down significantly, because I don't know who Oklahoma's quarterback is.
Yeah, Oklahoma, in terms of Auburn, this is going to be a test of whether Hugh Freeze has anything left in terms of the quarterback guru, the offensive guru label that he used to have. I think has surrendered the last couple of seasons at Auburn. But this is a fresh start with a fresh quarterback. The Peyton Thorne experiment didn't work. We don't have to beat that to death. We've already covered. Hugh Freeze erred when he didn't get a new quarterback before this season. But Auburn is continuing with Hugh Freeze. He signed a very, very good recruiting class. And so they're giving this another chance to work. And I think there's an opportunity for the offense to look much better with a new trigger man and Jackson Arnold. But to the point of Oklahoma, I mean, you hit it, John. I mean, it just, you don't know who the quarterback's going to be for them next season. And I think there's a lot of questions facing Oklahoma and Brent Venables, who will be entering a critical year 4, that Oklahoma foolishly and needlessly gave him a raise and an extension before this season. I mean, who was kicking down Oklahoma's door to plunder away Brent Venables? I mean, that just wasn't happening. And so they sort of backed themselves into a corner before this year. And then wouldn't you know it, they go 6-6 this season. So Venables survived this year, but he's not going to be able to survive another 6-6 season. And as we know, they played one of the toughest schedules in the country this year. Well, they're getting the same conference schedule next season, just flipping home and road. And it's not just Jackson Arnold. Like I mentioned, there are other members of that program that, just in terms of talent, you guys you'd like to hang on to. When you're trying to build some momentum off a 6-6 season. So when I look around the hot seat in college football toward 2025, John, I see a lot of guys inside the SEC alone that, if not on the hot seat, are pretty close to the hot seat. Well, be that as it may, even as crowded as that terrain is, it's hard to find a guy, I think, on a hotter seat in college football than what Brent Venables is. I mean, maybe Sam Pittman at Arkansas, who spent the season on the hot seat and survived, but I don't know. Brent Venables has been elbowing guys out of the way as he tries to get to the front of the hot seat line.
He's like he's sliding down a fireman's pole and bumping guys out of the way. No, I'm going to be the lowest, okay, or the highest for the hot seat. Yeah, he's racing to that hot seat. Oklahoma football, you got to understand. I mean, I know it's new to the SEC, but I think people pretty much look at Oklahoma as one of the programs in college football. And the idea that you would have 2 seasons in 3 years is un-Oklahoma-like, is these two, and both on Brent Venables' watch. I mean, that's pretty stunning. And now look what's happening with the transfer portal. These guys that are leaving there, starters that are leaving there, Auburn can take a quarterback away from Oklahoma. That really shouldn't be happening. And it really makes me wonder about, you have a coach, he may not be officially on the hot seat or whatever we want to call it, but it tells me fans don't believe in Brent Venables. And when fans don't believe, they don't contribute to NIL. And when you don't contribute to NIL, players leave. It's a vicious cycle. And I think that's what we're seeing here at Oklahoma. Because I look at Oklahoma, it was totally lacking in receivers. It had 5 receivers supposedly on the injury list. That's unheard of to me, that in itself. And then I don't know how hurt Nick Anderson was, but now he's transferring. It makes me wonder if he just didn't want to play this year. So he's gone. I don't know about their receiving core. Their offensive line was a mess most of the year, got a little better toward the end. And it was last year, Oklahoma lost pretty much its whole offensive line. And these guys, so it went to the transfer portal. Injuries impacted it. You got all that. It's got some really good defensive players. And those guys they're going pro now. So I look at Oklahoma right now, and to me, it's one of the worst 4 teams in the SEC right now. That's what I see in Oklahoma. Well, it won 2 conference games. It's already there. And I look at this schedule. How's it going to get any better?
Yeah, the non-conference games next year are Illinois State, Michigan at home, Temple, and Kent State. So it sort of comes down to that home game against Michigan as to whether they can go 4-0 in the non-conference. But the SEC schedule is brutal. I mean, they have Auburn at home. They have Texas and Dallas. They have South Carolina on the road, Ole Miss at home, Tennessee on the road, Alabama on the road, Missouri at home, LSU at home. I mean, you just look at that. You look at the second half of the season, John. Texas, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Alabama, Missouri, and LSU. You see any slam dunks in that mix? I don't.
No.
I mean, that's not a schedule you want when you're a coach that's facing a make or break season, and that's the situation Oklahoma and Brent Venables find themselves in going into 2025.
You don't want that schedule if you're trying to make the playoff or win a national title.
Right. Yeah.
That schedule just doesn't get you where you want to go. And you're right. You look at this, there's so many things to look at now. You transfer portal additions, players returning, but also, are you set at quarterback? Well, look how this one move, and I know the jury's still out on Jackson Arnold, but he does have talent. I've seen enough of him to say, yeah, this guy's got talent. Needs to get a right system, good coaching, right players around him, maybe. So there is hope there. But I don't see any hope with Oklahoma. I mean, I saw Michael Hawkins. He's athletic, plays hard, but I don't know if he can just orchestrate a potent passing game. And I don't know if he has the talent around him to enhance his skills. So quarterback, coaching, and then just overall attrition, passing game, and you're losing your key defensive players. I mean, I don't know if Oklahoma's when's it been lower than this.
Yeah, get the hot boards ready. I think that's the message here in this moment. And it's not just 1 year where Oklahoma's losing its starting quarterback. This is now back-to-back years, going back to losing Dylan Gabriel after last season. And then, what did Dylan Gabriel do? Led Oregon to the #1 seed in the playoff and finished as a Heisman finalist. So, all right, John, let's pick some games and then get to the eggnog. We need some spiked eggnog, I think, after the performance we've had picking games against the spread this year. But as bad as we've been equally bad. It's a hotly tested competition coming down the stretch here. We are now tied in the standings, John, both at 38 and 44 against the spread in the fight for 500. So here we go. We'll pick the 4 first-round games. Let's start off, John, with the game on Friday night. Indiana at Notre Dame. Notre Dame red hot after that puzzling loss to NIU in week 2, but Notre Dame of really any team in this field other than maybe Group of 5 Boise State has played the softest schedule. So Notre Dame's looked great throughout October and November, but I do think this will be a test of, was that a mirage propped up by the schedule, or regardless of schedule, has Notre Dame found its stride? And is it truly one of the top teams in its country, in the country, which is the way they've played, the past really 2.5 months. So Notre Dame, 7.5-point favorite. How about lead off here, John? I'm going to take Indiana in the points. I like Notre Dame to win. It feels like it could be a low-scoring game. I think Indiana, because they got blown out by Ohio State, not really getting much respect when you combine their schedule with the blowout in the marquee game that they had. But, really every other time out this season, Indiana's looked darn good. I know they won in a close one against Michigan, but after Michigan beat Ohio State, even winning a close one there looks a little bit better. And everybody else on their schedule they handled with ease. So I'll take Notre Dame to win, but I don't think it comes as easily as maybe somebody expects. So I'll go with the Hoosiers at the points.
Yeah, I kind of like that. I guess we can play the little brother card in this one. I mean, in Indiana football, Notre Dame towers over everything. Indiana's a basketball school. Really like Cignetti as a coach with Indiana. I saw a very balanced team all year. I know it didn't play well against Ohio State. It didn't handle that game well, but I'm not writing it off. A couple of games bother me about Notre Dame. Well, one really, certainly the Northern Illinois game, and we can throw that out as an aberration, I guess, losing to a MAC team, a mediocre MAC team. But the game that bothered me more, Southern Cal, though Notre Dame won, had plenty of offense. It gave up 552 yards to Southern Cal. And that makes me think that maybe Notre Dame's defense, as high as it's rated, that rating is based somewhat on a soft schedule. That those stats it's compiled, I don't necessarily trust that defense against what I think is a well-balanced Indiana offense. I think Indiana, not only will I take the points, I think Indiana might win the game.
Ooh.
I really do.
All right. So if you're looking for a first round upset straight up, that's one that you're eyeing. Do you see an upset in this one, John? SMU, the last team into the field in terms of at-large selection, goes on the road at Penn State. Penn State, 8.5-point favorite. I saw some reporting at a Happy Valley as we record this on Monday, John. There's snowfall on the ground, so a little different conditions at Penn State than what SMU would expect for a home game in Dallas. So do you like the favorites in this one? Nittany Lions, 8.5-point favorite.
Well, the thing I like about Penn State that I usually don't like, I don't trust Penn State. I haven't for a while in a big game. I don't trust its offense. I think that's where it will come up short if it won't have enough offense, say, to beat Ohio State. It didn't this year, even on its home field. But when I saw it against Oregon, it really moved the ball well. I mean, that was a high-scoring game. And I thought, it moved the ball about as well as anybody did all year on Oregon. Ohio State put up, I think, 31 points. Boise put up over 30. But that impressed me, and that made me think that Penn State might be a little better than I thought it was. So I will give the points here because SMU's defense against Clemson was really lacking. I thought it would play better against Clemson than it did. So I'm going to take Penn State and give the points.
I'm going to follow you in that direction, John. Give the points, take Penn State. Penn State, they're lacking for, I guess, a marquee victory, but not unlike Indiana. They've looked pretty good most of the season, including in a competitive game against undefeated Oregon. They flopped at home against Ohio State, but for the most part, they've been pretty strong this season. SMU, I thought, got unmasked a little bit in that ACC championship game against Clemson. So I'll roll with the home team, give the points, and take Penn State as well. Bit of a curious line, John, in the betting world. Ohio State, a 7-point home favorite at Tennessee. It's like a lot of people are wondering why the spread is quite this big. Not surprised that Ohio State is a favorite, but coming off that loss to Michigan, this is supposed to be the most competitive game in the first round, the 8-9 matchup, and Ohio State favored by 7. But sometimes when you see those funny lines and you're thinking, oh well, of course I'm going to take Tennessee in the points. You go against the logic there and say that the folks in Vegas maybe are onto something. So I'm going to take that and take that to heart, and I will take Ohio State, give the points. I really don't trust Tennessee on the road, John. From what we've seen the last few years, we touched on it earlier, just a different team at home and road. Now, the one caveat here is if Ohio State's just mentally broken after that loss to Michigan, they might not only fail to cover the spread, they might lose the game outright. But nonetheless, I just can't quit the Buckeyes. I've been, in the camp all season that thinks this could be the year where Ryan Day gets it done despite the loss to Michigan. Michigan's not in this playoff. So I'm going to give the points and take the talent advantage that I think Ohio State has.
Yeah, I think the odds makers look at Ohio State, and I think most people do, and you said it earlier, talented roster. We hear the same thing about Texas, perhaps a lot. And Ohio State certainly does have talent and seems to have more talent across the board at Tennessee. Two things stick out to me in this game, though, that favor Tennessee. One is Ohio State's history against the SEC in postseason. It's 2-13. It just, and I covered a couple of those championship games, back-to-back games when it played Florida in the 2007 Fiesta Bowl after the 2006 season. That was supposed to be a super Ohio State team. It got demolished by Florida, 41-14. Next year, Ohio State's in the Sugar Bowl, jumps out to 10-0 lead on LSU. LSU scores 31 unanswered points, wins by 14, but the game wasn't really that close. I've seen too many of those kind of games with Ohio State in the postseason against the Big Ten. The exception was when Urban Meyer was the coach, and he beat Alabama. Urban Meyer knows how to beat SEC teams. He was in the SEC, and he outcoached Nick Saban in the to win the 2014 national championship. That was in the semifinals. He went on to beat Oregon handily in the championship game. So that, to me, is a concern. Ohio State has lost 2 starting offensive linemen along the way. Seth McLaughlin, the center, I think he transferred from Alabama, was an All-American candidate. And I look what Michigan did against that offensive line, and I really think Tennessee's defensive front can do the same thing. So I'm going to take the points, and I really think Tennessee has a good chance of winning this game.
You make a great point with the offensive line injuries, John. That in addition to questions about the mental state of this team after losing to Michigan, that would be my other biggest question is how much Tennessee can take advantage of a banged up Ohio State offensive line, because I think Ohio State's at its best whenever it's able to set the tone up front, establish the run game, not put too much on Will Howard's shoulders. If you can't get that run game going against Tennessee's defense, that could paint Ohio State into a corner a little bit. So, all right, John, we'll wrap up with the most lopsided line in the first round here. Clemson, the only 3-loss team in the field, going to Texas. Texas, an 11.5-point favorite. Well, I can't quit the Buckeyes, John, because I'm wooed by all their talent, and I can't quit Texas either. Texas I know they lost twice to Georgia. They really blew it in Atlanta, but I like their path in the playoff. I, like many poll voters, the CFP committee was kind of won over by the eye test more times than not. I just can't resist those talented teams because I feel like historically in college football, I mean, it's not rocket science. The most talented teams have the best chance to win the championship. So I'm giving the points. I'm taking Texas to win in a lopsided one.
Yeah, I'm in your camp on this one. You look at Clemson. What did it do against Georgia? It got beat 34-6. What did it do against South Carolina? It got beat on its home field 17-14. Well, here's another SEC team. I think Clemson peaked. It won its way into the playoff, and I think that for that team, that roster, and for what all is happened with Clemson this year, that's an accomplishment. But I just think that's as far as it can go. The concern I have about Texas, I'm like you. See, I see that talent. To me, when that team is cooking, it looks like the best team in the country. Defensive front, offensive line, can throw the ball, can run the ball. It's got not one but 2 really good quarterbacks. But I kind of feel like you. Okay, here I am invested in Texas again. And why do I trust Texas? I always flash back to Vanderbilt. It beat Vanderbilt by 3 points. How in the world does Vanderbilt stay within 3 points of Texas? But it looks like such a good team to me that I just think, well, it's going to rise to the occasion this time, even though it didn't last time. It'll probably end up beating Georgia for the national championship after Georgia's already beat it twice. So I'll go with Texas too. So we've only got one difference maker there.
Yeah, that's all it takes to put someone into first place in the standings, John. So, all right, well, enjoy the first round of the playoff. Merry Christmas to our listeners as well. Thanks for being with us throughout this season. We'll stick with you throughout the postseason and be back with you next week. Thanks for listening to this edition of SEC Football Unfiltered.